So how we can all cope with COVID-19 right now? And how can we support ourselves, our friends, our family, our coworkers better? What are some strategies we can use? Today, our guest is Dr. Adriana Miu. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and assistant professor in University of Texas, Southwestern Medical Center. And she is in Texas right now. She earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Emory University, and she finished her postdoctoral fellowship from Stanford Psychiatry Department. She also worked there for 2 years as a clinical instructor before she joined UT Southwestern. Today, she will share with us her expertise about trauma-informed coping strategies under COVID-19. And she will really teach us a lot of practical coping strategies that we can immediately start using and practicing in our daily life. Let's listen to what she's going to share with us. Welcome, Adriana. Thanks for coming to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know. Actually, you are a psychologist. You used to work in San Francisco Bay Area, where I am right now, and now you moved to Texas. You work there and doing clinical work and research at the same time, right?
Yeah, I am mostly working in the adult outpatient clinic at UT Southwestern Medical Center. It is a academic medical setting, but we see a lot of people in a general clinic.
Yeah, so in those kind of setting, I'm curious, under this coronavirus crisis, it's everywhere, right? I know Texas possibly have slightly different situations than what we have here in California or than the East Coast, New York area. So do you see anyone got impacted negatively by the coronavirus situation in your clinical setting?
Yeah, and actually, now that we have converted to teletherapy or telehealth,
Mm-hmm.
actually met with a few patients who think that they are positive and who got
Oh,
tested for
oh.
coronavirus. And then there are also those who are actually really anxious about catching it themselves, or those who are just really bored and not knowing what to do during this shelter in place.
Yeah, so sounds like people are reacting to it very differently.
Yeah, yeah. And some of it, I think a lot of these reactions are similar. And I certainly feel some of them myself, like feeling bored at home, like adjusting
Mm-hmm.
to a whole new routine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
definitely challenging for everyone.
right. Definitely for each one of us. Definitely, I feel that too. I'm trying to adjust how to work from home, how to still balance life and work. Yeah. So I know, I read a lot of news in China before all this happened in America. I think it's such a huge pandemic throughout the world. I heard a lot of news that people are losing jobs, losing people they love, or they cannot really meet their friends, their family members. So I would imagine that psychologically that could be very traumatic experience for a lot of people to different levels.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing that I'm very interested in and passionate about is trauma-informed care.
Mm,
Because the whole idea of trauma-informed care, which came from SAMHSA, is the idea that the event in itself can affect people in different way, in different
mm,
system. And we
mm-hmm.
need to be aware of not just that one event, but also the consequences afterward, how it may influence the dynamic with others. So, for example, we typically think of coronavirus as just affecting those who get it or those who are in the medical field. But there are
Right.
so many essential employees who are also at risk of contracting it, or those other people whose businesses suffer because of coronavirus. So they are also having a really difficult time, in addition to those we typically think are impacted by coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like I read news about grocery store cashiers. They're afraid about the disease, their own safety, their life. I heard people under different stress, either try to survive through this financial crisis or this health crisis, or overwork, try to, catch up with the demand.
Yeah. So it's definitely everywhere. And it's not just like for one person, but it's quite global.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just for general knowledge, because I know as psychologists, we possibly know trauma experience very well. We possibly are familiar with these common symptoms or warning signs, like how traumatic experience impact us. So from your expertise, your professional point of view, what are some common symptoms, common signals people can really watch out for that, I am experiencing this, possibly it's because this traumatic experience or this situation?
Yeah, so the very traditional sense of trauma on the DSM, which is like the psychological Bible, is really about like actual or threatened death, or sexual assault or physical injuries. And in a different way, the COVID-19 may not be as traumatic in those particular ways, but it really embodies a general sense of a trauma in which people don't really have full control over the situation. And there's this like sudden loss of control, sense of helplessness, like they know something is bad, but they can't really do much to like prevent it or make sure. And this sense of helplessness is one of the core features of something that's traumatic, because it is not a good feeling to feel like you can't do anything to prevent something bad from happening.
Right.
So some other symptoms that could be signs of common reactions to trauma is the idea of constant fear and anxiety. So always worrying about whether you're going to get it, or having a lot of intrusive thoughts about coronavirus. Typically, people cannot shut their minds about coronavirus if they are having ongoing anxiety. There could be other extremes, like for people with trauma, they might try to avoid any reminders, and they go to the opposite end of doing everything they can to avoid thinking about it. And other people might have really negative beliefs about the situation or about themselves. They might take this as a sign that they absolutely have no control, or they can't really deal with it at all, even if it were to happen. So actually, COVID-19 can be really much worse and exacerbating people's situations if they have previous trauma or if they have previous mental illness.
Yeah, so that definitely can make things more complicated with other existing conditions.
Yeah, and it's like clinically, I've seen people who have previous trauma, they will say that this coronavirus further makes them feel helpless because they can't control everything. Like they can't control whether their families are going out or whether they will contract the virus and whether they will bring it in. And it's this sense of uncertainties and not being able to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. That's kind of a major trauma reaction.
Right. Sounds like a lot of fight or flight or freeze reactions, just exaggerated in different ways. And I definitely hear, yeah.
But it makes a lot of sense why they feel that way, especially if in the past they've been in situations where they didn't feel like they could protect themselves.
Yeah. Or in this new situation, whatever they've been normally using to cope with stress now does not work anymore. And too much information. I know a lot of people have nightmares, a lot of sleep problems.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if people are experiencing some of these symptoms or experience some of this situation, these reactions that does not help them at all, or their daily functioning get impacted, what can people do? You are very good at, you're expert in this field of trauma-informed treatment or coping strategies. Then what you think the general public could really learn from this professional area of knowledge to really help them cope with the situation better?
Yeah, one of the core things about trauma coping or trauma-informed coping is safety. So safety can come in different ways, and it may look like making sure that you have all the things that you need for the upcoming period, rather than feeling like all of a sudden you have to like be blindsided from some changes. So this may look like appropriately like stocking up your pantry and getting the medications and have at least 2 weeks supply or 1 month supply if you can, so that you feel like there's this rescue mode. Like if something were to happen, you can rely on that supply of food and medications, and you're not going to need to go into this like panic react mode. Other things that can help people feel safer, maybe just general good practice of self-care. And this, like, I think you can share more about the please mastery, which is a really nice way of breaking down what are the core important components of self-care. So please, like, it stands for physical illness in a PL. So that may be taking care of your body, taking prescribed medications, and making sure that we take care of our body and have good immune system, in that sense. And then E of the please is eating. And usually when we are stuck at home, that might be the time to overeat because we're bored, or we might be too tired or too stressed out to cook. But this is actually one of the most important things to do, is to make sure we do balanced eating so that we take in good nutrients and we are having a good immune system. The A in the please is avoid mood-altering drugs. So that may be making sure that we reduce the amount of drugs or alcohol that we use so that we're in the best shape. And we are more grounded and more stable in our life. And the more grounded and more even we feel, that's the time when we feel the safest. And that's what I would recommend in terms of this traumatic time of the COVID-19, when there's just so much uncertainties. The more we feel more grounded and safe, the more stable and certain we or feel more in control. And then after the A part, the S part of the please is sleep. So this is one of the hardest things. And as Yishan, you mentioned that we might read the news, we might be doing a lot of things right before our sleep, and we might just stay up worrying about what will happen. But sleep is going to be the most important things. And later on, we can talk more about needing to reduce the exposure to news, so that we are not constantly thinking that the threat is near us or that we're under constant threat. Besides the sleep, is the exercise. And this is also another major challenging area because we can't go out as much. It's harder to exercise at the gym or run outside. And this might be the time to consider other forms of exercise like yoga or HIIT exercises, something that you can do at home so that, again, you can build up the immune system.
Right. I definitely do that a lot more right now. Actually, it feels like I am exercising more often than before.
That is so funny. That is exactly my situation.
Mm-hmm.
I have been thinking, well, I'm not commuting as much, so I might as well use that commute time that I gain to do just a little bit. And it's been kind of fun to try out something new because I don't usually follow an app to
Mm-hmm.
exercise. But
Right.
this coronavirus has definitely forced me to do that.
Yeah, I actually like the one of the small points you just mentioned. Save up the commute time we had before, use it for some small daily self-care routines, right?
Mm-hmm,
Surprisingly, I
mm-hmm.
have some clients coming in, they've been using that time to work more and then feel like burned out, exhausted, and not happy. But when we talk about that, they realize, oh, my commute time before, I used to listen to podcasts, music. Now I don't have that time, so I just end up overworking.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I even need to monitor myself because I noticed I was sometimes it's harder to call at an end of the workday because you have been working from home all day long. So you might forget to like shut off the computer or to stop checking the work messages after a few hours. But I would really recommend like setting a good routine with beginning of the workday and end of workday so that we don't end up actually losing the hours for self-care.
Right, like that. Hmm.
And then the very last part of the self-care is try to find ways for mastery or building mastery. And we can't even think of um, this as being a silver lining because in the past, when we used to go to work, it's harder to fit in time, like the time you use in commuting, especially in the Bay Area, it's so long.
Hmm.
And now you have this extra time. That could be a nice time to try something new at home. And when you don't get to go out at all, you might actually find other things that you have been postponing or procrastinating on. That could be a time to try something new.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Yeah, I really like this handout. I think it's from DBT, right? Dialectical
Yes,
behavior therapy. Very good coping
yes.
strategy.
And I kind of like that it's all in one word. So it's easier
Right.
to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will definitely put this on the website and the link to it, to the show note, so for people to have access to it. And I think everyone can also Google it. There are a lot of handouts like
Mhm.
this out there.
Yeah, and people don't have to strictly follow this, but this can be a good reminder of what are the different areas of self care.
Mm-hmm.
But self care is not about like being just too nice to ourselves to eat 2 cookies a day, but self care is really to take good care of our bodies and our mind.
Yes, definitely. I really like that. I think we want to remind everyone. I'm glad you mentioned that self-care does not need a lot of time to do. It
Mm-hmm.
can really be the daily little routine, small things we do for ourselves. Similarly to mindfulness, be mindful to every small moment day to day. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
meditate
Mm-hmm.
for an hour or two per day.
Yeah, and I actually think that the mindfulness is another really good strategy to help people feel more in control. Um, when they are paying attention to the present moments, they are not so on autopilot about what's going on outside the world or having those ruminative thoughts, but they're able to kind of pause and notice what's really happening now.
Yes, great. So this is one of the coping strategies. I think it's very structured. It's easy for people to remember. And I totally agree. I think we all want to remind ourselves safety, self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Those are so
Mm-hmm.
important and so basic.
Yeah. And there is another handout on is from Action for Happiness. It's actually a calendar of what are some of the small little things we can do during this coronavirus. Um, And I really like that the things that they mention are something small, achievable. So, for example, they would say make a plan, or write down 10 things you feel grateful for. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up, or you can share it.
Okay, let me see.
Let me see. Oh, I got it. I think so. Let me see. This one, right?
Yeah. So actually, some of these things are similar along the line of mindfulness. Typically, when people think about mindfulness or meditation, it's like you need to be in a super like Zen mode, in a super setting where you can just totally be in that moment. But that's actually kind of hard when you're working from home with other people. So these might be a little bit more doable. Like, for example, in the day 11, notice 5 things that are beautiful in the world around you. That could be a fun thing to do so that we're not just focusing on coronavirus. We can notice the plants we might have or the trees outside and the spraying that's going on right now,
Right.
that we didn't get to enjoy as much. An example, for example, number 16, it could be we discover your favorite music that really lifts your spirit. So this calendar kind of gives people one idea one day to try. And this might be a more achievable way of dealing with the crisis rather than feeling like, oh, I need to check off this and this and that.
Yeah, I like that. Especially when you have one thing every day, it's very easy to follow, right? I don't have to think much. I can just come to this calendar and think about, okay, today's Monday, which one I want to do. Okay, that's it. Let me try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of people after we practice different psychological skills, they start forgetting what we have learned, right?
Yeah, I know. It's like we introduce so many different ones that it's hard to keep track. But the good thing is, I think from therapy, they tend to remember some of it. So if you remind them, they will know or they will pick it up really quickly. But these things are actually doable even if you're working remotely.
Right. Yeah, I like all these techniques can really be adapted to this working from home mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great one. I will personally, I think I'm like not only gonna want to print it out, hang up for myself, I also want to really pass it out to my other clients. I can already imagine a lot of people can really benefit from this.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this.
Well, in terms of trauma informed coping, I mentioned that safety is one of the major way of coping. Um, and I think besides stocking up on like making sure your routine is as typical or like as usual as you can, um, there's also other parts of trauma informed care to consider. For example, trying to get good, trustworthy information. We mentioned earlier about reading news and not um, not over being overexposed or not spending way too much time on news. So we talked about safety, and the second part is really about being transparent and getting the right information. So I've had people who turn on the news station for the whole day, like for example on NBC, and they actually become really overwhelmed because they are exposed to the news all the day, all the time. And actually, at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, I used to track the number of cases in my area pretty closely. But later on, I decided, wow, that's just like way too much information. And having an additional 100 cases is not going to change my preparation plan. So I just decided, like, at this point, like, after you already know all the key information you need and the trusted information, then it's probably good to restrict the amount of time you spend on researching.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Especially when sleep is a problem, right? Yeah, reading too much and that can turn into nightmares, turn into difficulties falling asleep, or I have people trigger their like panic attacks in the middle of the night. They just gonna wake up often.
Yeah. Another part about trauma or traumatic experiences is because the situation is so uncertain, we tend to want to find a lot of information. We want to be as knowledgeable as we can so that we feel more in control. But that could backfire. At the same time, I think if you are in a position where you're in management or leadership, that may be a time to think about being as transparent as you can. There are employees who might worry about their financial security or what's going to happen with the company. And if they don't know, but they are guessing the worst case scenario, that can actually add on to the traumatic experience of the coronavirus itself.
When we don't know anything, we are guessing, we are predicting, that can trigger a lot of imaginations.
And usually the predictions are more of the negative type, especially during this time. I can't imagine someone thinking like, oh, I'm going to get a bonus at work.
Exactly. So it's more like catastrophizing, possibly.
Yeah, so if you're in a situation of management or leadership, if you can kind of help them set the right expectation, like, well, the company, like, we might not be able to keep all the hours, but we expect this and that, that may actually help some of the anxiety for the employees.
Yes, definitely. I think that's a good guideline for a lot of managers for leadership positions. What you can do to really manage people's mental health and sense of security, sense of like lower their anxiety right now.
And actually, if we think about the transparency in the US response initially, the mixed messages of hearing someone say that it's going to be bad and then hearing somebody say it's not that bad, it actually is worse than just telling people exactly where it is.
Right.
And so people can know and trust that information.
Yeah. Yeah, now look back, I think we all learned a lot from this process and surprisingly see this pattern, how that triggered people's emotional reactions over time.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how like we might come from a good intention of wanting to calm people down, not to worry them too much, but actually that can backfire when information might be the thing that people really want and need, or the transparency and trustworthiness.
Right, that's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the other parts of trauma-informed care also include the idea of peer support. And I know we talked a lot about social distancing, and that is kind of the opposite of like the idea of distancing from social connections is actually opposite of what's good for people.
Yeah.
So this,
right. Like we connect through like virtual coffee meetings, and I think social distance is one thing, but how to maintain physical distance but psychological connections, right?
Yeah, and especially if people are already feeling like stressed out or loss of control, having some peer support either from family, friends, or even colleagues could be really helpful in managing the uncertainties of the situation.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. Totally agree. I feel like social support or peer support is so important for all kinds of like stress management, emotion regulation. It's always a part of those.
Mm-hmm,
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are all great strategies for trauma informed coping strategies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Any other strategies people can borrow and use?
Well, in the rest of the trauma-informed model from SAMHSA, there's
Mm-hmm.
also collaboration, empowerment and choice, and cultural sensitivity.
Mm,
Um, and maybe I can talk more about empowerment and choice because during this time, so many people didn't have the choice about going to work or like going to the work building or going out and about. It's kind of like the choice is taken away from them because of the
right.
shelter in place orders or stay at home. So this is a time that actually makes people feel more stuck and helpless when they don't get to choose. Um, and this could be in ways coping with that. Some people could think about having more choices in ways that are within your control. So if you are in a family where you can't really go out to eat that much, that may be
Right.
to ask like the kids, like, oh, what choices would you like in choosing which restaurant to get takeouts from? Or what would be a fun item to get during this time? So people could still have some sort of choice and control in part of their life during this time when we don't get to say whether we go out as much.
Oh, I like that. So when the whole outside environment cannot offer us the same thing, we can still
Mm-hmm.
try to create some choices and empower ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
empower people around us with
Mm-hmm.
other choices.
Yeah, yeah. And that might also look like in work.
Mm,
You might think about giving people more flexibility in terms of when they submit something, understanding that some parents, they have a lot of young kids at home and they need to kind of help them with school.
mhm.
So their deadline, maybe like their ability to meet a deadline will be more later at night than during normal business hours. And
Mm,
being more flexible and giving people the choice to choose something would likely be really helpful at this
right,
time.
right. I feel like a lot of people working from home do feel more control of their own schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned several very big, important components so far, what people can do. And I think that's a lot of great guidance. So for the audience, when they want, after they watch this, they want to start practicing something immediately, right? Like the please is pretty good. They can use that as a structure to guide them. Is there any one or two strategies people can start practicing day to day that does not take a lot of time, it's easy to remember, can help us soothe ourselves or get grounded or just, really help with this kind of stress?
Yeah, I would say really sticking to a good routine
Mm-hmm.
um, in your daily schedule would be great. So, starting with like getting up at a certain time, starting work at a certain time, and then ending work at a certain time. I think ending is one of the most important thing. Like shutting off the computer or really unwinding rather than staying on it. And then the other thing is to be limiting the amount of information we get about the coronavirus because at a certain point it's not really helpful.
Right, right. Yeah. And before we go to the resources, actually, I have one question about the culture sensitivity, because our clinic is collaborating with the county locally. We are trying to have an online free support group for the Asian community to deal with all this extra stress right now we are all facing. Yeah. So from your point of view, I think that's part of this stress, right? One of the stressors for a lot of people, no matter what kind of ethnicity background you are from. So how can we understand this culture sensitivity, this culture piece in all this situation we are dealing with?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up because certain rhetoric in there is some discrimination on particularly Asian American groups, and that can further re-traumatize or add on the whole stressful experience of the coronavirus. So a big part is to recognize, whether you're Asian or not, to recognize that this coronavirus is not just like stressful because of the illness. It's also stressful because of the impacts and the discrimination on the Asian American groups. And what that could look like is, even if you don't identify as Asian, but understanding that maybe your Asian American neighbors are worried about going to the grocery store or being outside walking around and facing either verbal or physical like discrimination. And I'm sure everyone would appreciate checking in and just knowing that someone else is thinking about them and recognizing that they're not like just like everyone else, like they're not just worried about the coronavirus, they're worried about how other people are treating them, what they say, whether they're being blamed for the virus, whether they are being discriminated or seen as the coronavirus carrier. Being able to, like, I think like if there's more empathy and recognition of the impacts this has on Asian American population, that would be really helpful as just coping.
So the awareness is as important as coping itself.
And if you are Asian American, that may be a time to check in with yourself. How do you feel about all this discrimination going on? Are you worried about your own safety? And while we don't want to always jump to conclusion of what might happen, it's good to normalize and validate our own feelings, especially given what's going on. And this could also be a time to brainstorm different ways of helping you feel safer. So maybe instead of going to the grocery store physically, it could be getting online deliveries. It could be instead of taking a walk at a certain time when there are a lot of people, you might choose a time when you feel like is more safer. So this might be a time to really check in with yourself, like when you might feel safest, where you might feel safest.
Yeah, so we all have the ability to create some safety space for ourselves, or to create a sense of security for ourselves. So we really sounds like we want to look into ourselves to find out where is the comfort zone in this kind of situation, how we can protect that, and how we can help ourselves still be able to function, do whatever we need to do, and at the same time protect ourselves well.
Yeah, and be gentle with ourselves if we do feel unsafe, to recognize that makes a lot of sense. Because typically we feel bad for feeling bad, or we feel bad for worrying, especially for Asian American community. This is hard.
Yeah, I did not get the sentence clearly, but I think I think I get what you mentioned is we need to really take good care of ourselves and be more like aware what's going on around us, and take it slow, take it gentle, be gentle to ourselves and be gentle to people around us.
And I really like what you said. It's like trying to find ways that help us, because safety is the core of dealing with trauma.
Right. I really like that core of safety. Yeah. So, after hearing this, I'm sure a lot of people want to know more about this, like trauma-informed coping or other psychological coping strategies. What are some good resources you recommend to people who, have this need to continue to get more, learn more, and use more to cope with the situation?
Yeah, I can send you a few links that will be on trauma-informed coping for COVID-19.
Great.
There's also other strategies and handouts that I use in my clinical practice, especially on coronavirus anxiety workbook, that I found really helpful because they break down unhelpful thinking and activities that people can do, and ways to identify what's within our control, how we can ensure that safety in ourselves while recognizing we can't control everything outside.
Wow, that sounds awesome. That sounds very practical, that down to earth skills people can really understand and use. And I especially like that point you mentioned, to identify what is in our control, what it is out of our control, and what really we can do for ourselves right now.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
definitely a weird time for all of us.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's also important for us to normalize it, to validate our own feelings, right? If we feel unsafe, we feel insecure, we feel anxious, I think we are not alone.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. So, Adriana, if people want to find you, or if they want to know more about your clinical work, your research, how can they find you, or read more about you, or contact you?
Yeah, so I have a faculty profile. So if people look up UT Southwestern and my name, Adriana Miu, they should be able to look up my faculty profile, and which includes information on contacting me.
Great. So in the medical field you are working in, can people directly make appointment with you, or you just have to go through the clinic and they are assigned
And that is the
therapist?
part about working in a clinic, because I'm not the one to control everyone's referrals, and there's sometimes a wait list. So the clinic handles all of that.
Right. Do you have your own private practice? Do you plan to have one?
No, I do not have my own private practice. I kind of feel like I'm already super busy enough in my general clinic at the university, that I do not have time for private practice. Yeah.
Okay, great. So at least I will put all your profile, all the information, all the resources you mentioned on the website, on the show note, so audience can go there to read more.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's so great to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I'm so happy to have this opportunity to chat with you, to learn more about trauma and how to deal with it. Because before I talk to you, I think with many audience possibly have similar feelings. Trauma is such a big word, and it sounds so heavy, so negative. Feels like, oh, I don't even want to touch it. I don't know what to do with it. And first, it may not happen to everyone, and I may never need to know anything about it. But this kind of situation, we all face coronavirus. We all have different experience. So I think whatever you shared, there are a lot of shiny points, a lot of useful information can really help us think more and to practice more in our daily life.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming today. Very nice talking to you. Hopefully we get a chance to chat again.
Yeah, same here. Bye. Have a
Mm-hmm.
good day.
Bye. Okay. Thank you for watching our videos or listening to our podcast. If you like our show, please feel free to subscribe, like, and share it. If you have any questions or feedback, we would always love to hear from you. You can either email us or leave feedback on our website at mindbodygarden.com or directly under the YouTube video channel. Thank you very much for your company today, and hopefully to hear from you or have you with us next time.